For today's cup of coffee, we're going to be doing a couple of revisitings. I keep wanting to call them reboots, but
they're not reboots because we're not fixing them or trying to refix them.
Right. So this one will be part 1. And I worked hard on this series it was a 2-part series about mad scientists.
Yeah, it was good.
And some really bad stuff that humans have done to other humans.
Yeah, some shit happened.
And how it relates to people doing some bad stuff to other humans today. This is not new.
Did we ever cover the Siamese twin thing with the mad scientists?
I don't remember that one. I know that there were twin studies.
It was like there was experiments, and this mostly happened for like fruit shows or whatever, where it's like they would try to stitch up the 2 babies together.
Oh, no,
like,
for real?
Like make a double-head baby or something?
God.
Or a double-head child person? Whatever.
No, I think we did discuss in one or the other because I haven't watched them for a while, but just because we've got new subscribers.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes I can allude to a previous cup or something, but now let's face it, how many people are really going to go and search that out?
Exactly.
So it's easier for the viewers. And there was so much information in these videos that you can't get it all in one time.
No, not at all.
So they're very much worth watching again.
Mm-hmm.
For some of you who just read the title and then clicked on it or whatever. I see the analytics. I don't pay attention to them, but I do look at them every now and then.
That means you're paying attention to.
So that people are going, oh yes, I watched this, and no you didn't. No you didn't. I've got a chart that says no you didn't. So
you watched like a minute of it.
Right. But no, some of these I have taken a lot of time to research, and
yeah,
this series was one of them.
They're good. Watch them.
We're informative.
Listen to us. Help us get on the radar, please.
I don't want to be on the radar. I really don't want to be on the radar because then you have to be.
I want to be on the radar so we can start making money.
I don't care even about the money.
We can make a Venmo.
A what?
A Venmo.
What is that?
Think like PayPal.
Okay.
PayPal monies.
Okay. Anyhow, it's just a matter of...
We can take a Ven moment.
It's a matter of getting the information out there and so that people can make the connections.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a lot of ways, this is connecting dots that has been going on for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we're going to do the revisit.
I hope y'all enjoy it.
Yeah, we do. So, have fun.
Mm-hmm.
For today's cup of coffee, it's going to be rage time. It's going to be rage time probably for the next couple of nights because this subject is so vast.
I didn't want to be sitting on this one.
He didn't.
I was held by a gunpoint.
Well, not quite. It's just in the it's in the corner when it's needed. One of them. The other one is right there, close by.
It's like, do I really want to be upset
You do.
right now? No, I don't.
No, you do.
No, I don't.
Because this is dedicated to our skeptics of late.
Fuck you, skeptics.
And that is Joe Nickel and Benjamin Radford.
Fuck you, Joe Nickel and Benjamin Radford. Fuck you too.
And they may have good intentions.
That is unlikely.
You're going to have to lean into that microphone instead of lifting it up. We do not have a swing arm. We actually do have a swing arm.
We don't have 2 mics. That's our issue.
We do. I have a mixing board and all that stuff. We just have no place to set it up right now. That's a winter project. So, but anyhow, these skeptics who wanted to be with the science.
Even though their science is biased as hell.
Yeah. Well, now let me preface this by saying I am not anti-science. I am anti today's science.
Anti-modern science, unless it comes with certain medication.
Well, with science, it is a matter that you start with a hypothesis, which is a question. I wonder how this works. I wonder what this is. Then you do experiments, and you're supposed to be surprised pretty much by the results or the conclusions.
Yeah.
And this is where, you never start with a conclusion, because then you do just subconsciously, everything is going to, now you talk about the confirmation bias, that's what is going on today. Mm-hmm. And it's not just today, this has been going on for a long time. But this is bad science. And, if something cannot be repeated by somebody else, or, if they get different results, and this happens a whole lot. It was just like, and this is why you have to keep up with the science. But you also have to know the agenda and who has paid for the science.
I don't know that modern science has disproven flat earthers.
Well,
their own science has disproven
yes,
flat
I understand that. I do understand that, and that's somebody else's fight. It's
I like to shit on them when I get
fight.
a chance.
It's not my fight.
I like to get a shit on.
Now you've totally
derailed. I like to shit on them when I can.
You've totally derailed my thought. Yes. On this stuff.
Yes, because I'm trying to.
But I'm very passionate about science. Oh, I know what it was I was going to tell you.
No, I'm trying to. What's the word?
I don't
procrastinate. I'm trying to procrastinate.
Well, just don't procrastinate.
Topic.
When I was going through college, as far as one of the drug addiction models that they taught us was about the rat in the cage, and if given the choice between food or whatever and cocaine, that it would, use the cocaine until it died. Mm-hmm. And recently, within the past 5 or 10 years, somebody got to looking at that experiment, and they're like, let's see what happens if we do this. And so it was not just the rat in the cage with 2 dispensers. They had rat in Ratland, and it was wondrous. Mm-hmm. And they had the opportunity to interact with others. They had the opportunity for food, for sex, different things like that. And guess what? They didn't use the cocaine the way that they did in the initial experiment. So we can see the flaws of the initial experiment because the rat was bored.
Yeah.
And we can see how that can lead even as far as models with human addiction, but that's for a totally different cup of coffee, because I'm very passionate about that, and we do not understand a lot of what goes on with addiction. And the fact that there was a guy that was treating the condition back in the 70s with amino acids and vitamins and different things like that through intravenous, and that some of these people literally were cured within a couple of weeks, and that he got shut down and shut up.
Yes, because actual cures lose money.
Yep. So that is my problem with the science.
Science.
So that's science. The basis that I'm coming from, and this is going to be the our little backdrop, if you want to call it that, as for this, because you've got so many people.
It's not like we could have a little diagram of not diagram, what is it called?
I don't know. Periodic table?
No.
I don't know.
It's like a little model
of mad scientists. Diorama, yeah.
It's not like we could have a diorama of the topic that we are.
But we can actually do as far as a mad scientist doll.
You got mad scientist doll money? I don't.
We could use some of the ones that you've got in Rick and Morty in that.
Where do I have Rick and Morty merch other than pajama pants? I don't even know if that I have those.
That's a thought. But anyhow, are they flame retardant? So
I don't even know that I have them.
this is such a vast subject, like I said, and going through which ones I wanted to include, which ones I did not want to include. It's. I hope it pisses off anybody who would hear these things, because if this does not anger you or some kind of emotional response is caused by this, then you need to do a self-check.
I really don't want them.
I know you don't. This is the thing. A lot of people don't want to deal with stuff. And this part is, this is how some of these things continue to happen.
Aren't we dealing with enough personal shit?
Well, the world is dealing.
Pissed off?
The world is dealing with personal shit. You don't have to get all up in the air about it, because when you get so emotionally escalated, you can't think. And that's a matter of learning to control the emotions so that you can present a logical, reasonable argument with somebody who may not know these things. We've got a world that is so on the edge and so undisciplined, and that they get butthurt over the slightest little whatever. And that's emotional immaturity. It truly is. And those who know the least have a tendency to scream the loudest.
That's true.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about unethical human experimentation. And
Love that.
Many of these experiments violated U.S. law. These are based in the United States. There are others in other countries, but this is what we're focusing on right now. You could do a series that would probably last a month.
Is there going to be one about they tried to make like conjoined twins by sewing the head onto another person?
Yeah, we'll get to that in another one, but this is today's. These are some of the more. They're horrible. They're not as bizarre. We will get to like the Russian experiment, where as far as the dog heads and stuff like that.
Okay.
So it's a matter, like I said, it's vast.
There's always been mad scientists.
Yeah, absolutely. So some others, not only did they violate U.S. law, some others were sponsored by government agencies or rogue elements thereof. I am taking this from Wikipedia, and we'll include the link in the description box, including Centers for Disease Control, the United States military, and the Central Intelligence Agency. Or they were sponsored by private corporations which were involved in military activities. This is not theory, this is proven fact. The human research programs were usually highly secretive and performed without the knowledge or authorization of Congress, and in many cases information about them was not released until many years after the studies had been performed. In a lot of cases, years after some of the people that were involved in this stuff were dead.
Right, so they couldn't have any repercussions.
The ethical, professional, and legal implications of this in the United States medical and scientific community were quite significant and led to many institutions and policies that attempted to ensure that future human subject research in the United States would be ethical and legal. Public outrage in the late 20th century over the discovery of government experiments on human subjects led to numerous congressional investigations and hearings, including the Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission, both of 1975 and the 1994 Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments, among others. Now, I am not going to go into the human radiation thing tonight, because what I have is enough.
No, we know what radiation does to people.
Yeah.
Cancer.
Yeah. And some of these things
for cancer patients.
Well, and some of this stuff is going to be speaking without speaking because of the way that the world is in the moment. But I know very much that our listeners, viewers, whatever you want to call them, the people who share coffee with us are intelligent.
Y'all know exactly what we're
right. So I don't have to spell it out. So anyhow, in the 1840s, you had J. Marion Sims, who is often referred to as the father of gynecology. who performed surgical experiments on women without anesthesia. The women, one of whom was operated on 30 times, eventually died from infections resulting from the experiments.
Is that not shocking?
Well, to test one of his theories about the causes of lockjaw in infants, Sims performed experiments where he used a shoemaker's awl to move around the skull bones of infants. It has been claimed that he addicted the women in his surgical experiments to morphine, only providing the drugs after surgery, and that was to make them more compliant. A contrary view is presented by the gynecological surgeon and anthropologist L.L. Weil about Sims, saying that he used post-operative opium that was well supported by the therapeutic practices of his day, and that the regime that he used was enthusiastically supported by many contemporary surgeons. So in other words, what he did was agreed with by the medical community at large.
Yep.
In 1874, Mary Rafferty came to Dr. Roberts Bartholow of the Good Samaritan Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio, for treatment of a lesion on her head. The lesion was diagnosed as a cancerous ulcer. Bartholow saw Rafferty's condition as terminal, but felt there was a research opportunity. He inserted electrode needles into her exposed brain matter to gauge her responses. This was done with no intention of treating her. Although Rafferty came out of the coma caused by the experiment, 3 days later she died from a massive seizure the following day. And Bartholow was criticized by fellow physicians, and the American Medical Association formally condemned his experiments as he had caused direct harm to the patient, not in an attempt to treat her, but solely to gain knowledge. Additional issues were raised with the consent obtained. Although she gave cheerful assent to the procedure, she was described as feeble-minded and likely did not fully understand. And Bartholow apologized for his actions and expressed regret that some knowledge had been gained at the expense of some injury to the patient. Now that's a sociopath right there.
Absolutely it is.
In 1896, Dr. Arthur Wentworth performed spinal taps on 29 young children without the knowledge or consent of their parents at Children's Hospital in Boston. And that was to discover whether doing so would be harmful.
No shit. It would be
Now,
harmful.
for people who may not know, a spinal tap is usually performed, they can use a little bit of topical anesthetic on it, but it is a highly painful procedure. And it can lead to a lot of complications if somebody does it improperly. Somebody can be paralyzed. You can have infection. You can die from it. So, yeah, just for shits and giggles, 29 kids, let's poke them with large needles in their spine. From 1913 to 1951, Dr. Leo Stanley, chief surgeon at the San Quentin prison, performed a wide variety of experiments on hundreds of prisoners. Many of the experiments involved testicular implants, where Stanley would take the testicles out of an executed prisoner and surgically implant them into a living prisoner. And what did he do with the ones that dude already had?
Yeah.
In other experiments, he attempted to implant the testicles of rams, goats, and boars into living prisoners. He also performed various eugenics experiments and forced sterilizations on San Quentin prisoners. Stanley believed that his experiments would rejuvenate old men, control crime, which he believed had biological causes, and prevent the unfit from reproducing.
Exactly, Kiska. That gag was fitting.
And then from 1955 to 1960, Sonoma State Hospital in Northern California served as a permanent drop-off location for mentally disabled children diagnosed with cerebral palsy or lesser disorders. The children subsequently underwent painful experimentation without adult consent. Many were given spinal taps for which they received no direct benefit. Now, this is a separate one. So obviously somebody was familiar with Wentworth from 1896 and decided that for shits and giggles that he would do the Spinal Tap thing again.
Love that.
Reporters of 60 Minutes, that was back when they actually reported stuff, learned that in these 5 years, the brain of every child with cerebral palsy had died at Sonoma State, was removed and studied without parental consent. So not only did they do the spinal taps for shits and giggles, then they harvested the brains.
And that was with kids with cerebral palsy?
Uh-huh. Or lesser disorders. Yeah. Yeah. Then, in the 1880s in Hawaii, a Californian physician working at a hospital for lepers injected 6 girls under the age of 12 with syphilis. In 1895, New York City pediatrician Henry Heinemann intentionally infected 2 mentally disabled boys, one 4-year-old, one 16-year-old, with gonorrhea. A review of the medical literature of the late 19th and early 20th centuries found more than 40 reports of experimental infections with gonorrheal culture, including some where gonorrheal organisms were applied to the eyes of sick children.
That's
monstrous. I mean, it's what we're talking about. We're talking about mad scientists and monstrous behavior. U.S. doctors in the Philippines injected 5 prisoners with bubonic plague and introduced beriberi in 29 prisoners. 4 of the test subjects died as a result. In 1906, Professor Richard P. Strong of Harvard University intentionally infected 24 Filipino prisoners with cholera, which had somehow become contaminated with bubonic plague. Sounds like somebody was mixing things in a test tube, doesn't it? He did this without the consent of the patients and without informing them of what he was doing. All of the subjects became sick and 13 died. In 1908, 3 Philadelphia researchers infected dozens of children with tuberculum at St. Vincent Orphanage in Philadelphia, causing permanent blindness in some of the children and painful lesions and inflammation of the eyes in many of the others. In the study, they refer to the children as material used. Science! In 1909, Frank, it's crazier, honestly, his name is crazier, Knowles, published a study in the Journal of American Medical Association describing how he had deliberately infected 2 children in an orphanage with Moschulum contagiosum, which is a virus that causes growth like warts, but usually disappears entirely, after an outbreak in the orphanage to study the disease. Or why didn't he use the ones that were already infected? Why did he have to infect the ones that didn't have it?
Don't know.
And in 1911, Dr. Hideo Noguchi of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in Manhattan injected 146 hospital patients, some of whom were children, with a syphilis extract. He was later sued by the parents of some of the child subjects who allegedly contracted syphilis as a result of his experiments. Now, that was in 1911. They were still trying to figure out, if you're not out here going around sleeping with everything, then that very much reduces the chances that you're going to get a disease.
Yeah.
Then, of course, one of the most famous, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, was a clinical study conducted between 1932 to 1972 in Tuskegee, Alabama. This is by U.S. Public Health Service. In the experiment, 399 impoverished black males who had syphilis were offered treatment by the researchers, who did not tell the test subjects that they had syphilis and did not give them the treatment for the disease, but rather just studied them to chart the progress of the disease. By 1947, penicillin became available as treatment, but those running the study prevented study participants from receiving treatment elsewhere, lying to them about their true condition so they could observe the effects of syphilis on the human body. By the end of the study in 1972, only 74 the test subjects were alive. Remember, they started out with 399. 28 of the original 399 men had died of syphilis. 100 were dead of related complications. 40 of their wives had been infected, and 19 of their children were born with congenital syphilis. The study was not shut down until 1972, when its existence was leaked to the press, forcing the researchers to stop in the face of public outcry. Yeah, science! Just the science. In 1941, at the University of Michigan, virologist Thomas Francis, Jonas Salk, and other researchers deliberately infected patients at several Michigan mental institutions with the influenza virus by spraying the virus into their nasal passages. Now, Jonas Salk is one of these that has been revered. He really has. He was this wonderful. They put him up on a pedestal. Really? This is why people need to go back and learn about these things.
I understand.
Yeah. And so
People really do need to
they do, because if you forget the past, you have a tendency to repeat it. Francis Peyton Rouse wrote the following to Thomas Francis. He said, "It may save you much trouble if you publish your paper elsewhere than in the Journal of Experimental Medicine. The journal is under constant scrutiny by the anti-vivisectionist, who would not hesitate to play up the fact that you used your test human beings in a state institution. That the tests were wholly justified goes without saying." So in other words, what dude is saying is, oh yeah, keep doing these unethical, inhumane experiments. Just don't talk about it, because somebody that thinks that what you're doing is wrong might get word out to the rest of the public. Yeah. In 1941, Dr. William C. Black inoculated a 12-month-old baby with herpes who was offered as a volunteer.
Who the fuck would offer their child
Now
that?
think, in today's world, how many people are offering their children as test subjects? It sounds horrible, but it's true. He submitted his research to the Journal of Experimental Medicine, which rejected the findings due to the ethically questionable research methods used in the study. Rouse called the experiment an abuse of power, an infringement of the rights of an individual, and not excusable because the illness which followed the had implications for science. The study was later published in the Journal of Pediatrics.
Oh.
It's that old ball and cup thing. Just switch it. Just switch it out a little bit. This is why you have to really have people, and God bless, weaponized autism, because a lot of those folks are the ones that's putting together the puzzle pieces. And I say that in all sincerity, because they are designed to do things like that in such a time as this. Okay, in the Stateville Penitentiary malaria study was a controlled study of the effects of malaria on the prisoners of the Stateville Penitentiary near Joliet, Illinois, beginning in the 1940s. The study was conducted by the Department of Medicine at the University of Chicago in conjunction with the United States Army and the U.S. State Department. At the Nuremberg trials, Nazi doctors cited the precedent of the malaria experiments as part of their defense. That's horrifying.
Yeah.
The study continued at Stateville Penitentiary for 29 years. In related studies from 1944 to 1946, Dr. Alf Alving, a nephrologist and professor of the University of Chicago Medical School, purposely infected psychiatric patients at the Illinois State Hospital with malaria so that he could test experimental treatments on them. In 1946 to 1948 study in Guatemala, U.S. researchers used prostitutes to infect prison inmates, insane asylum patients, and Guatemalan soldiers with syphilis and other sexually transmitted diseases to test the effectiveness of penicillin in treating the STDs. They later tried infecting people with direct inoculations made from syphilis bacteria poured into the men's penises and on forearms and faces that were slightly abraded, which means that they had been scratched and different things like that. Or in a few cases, through spinal punctures. Approximately 700 people were infected as part of the study, including orphan children. The study was sponsored by the Public Health Service, the National Institutes of Health, the Pan American Health Sanitary Bureau, which is now the World Health Organization's Pan American Health Organization, and the Guatemalan government. The team was led by John Charles Cutler, who later participated in the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. Cutler chose to do the study in Guatemala because he would not have been permitted to do it in the United States. In 2010, when the research was revealed, the U.S. officially apologized to Guatemala for the studies. To sit there and go, oops, my bad.
Just oops. No. They need some sort of they need to be paid for that shit.
Yeah.
Or something.
Not only that, these people need to be held to account.
Yeah.
Not a slap on the wrist.
No.
Go
in jail, just like...
Jail's too good for them. Seriously.
Execution.
Yeah.
Electric chair.
Yeah.
I know for a fact they had that back then.
No, they've got it today. In 1950, to conduct a simulation of a biological warfare attack, the U.S. Navy sprayed large quantities of the bacteria Ceratata marcinians. That's not right, but I was going to call it that. Read it in the description box because I'm getting escalated and I'm starting to stutter.
I'm starting to hear shit, so...
And so it was considered harmless at the time over the city of San Francisco during a project called Operation Sea Spray. Numerous citizens contracted pneumonia-like illnesses, and at least one person died as a result. The family of the person who died sued the government for gross negligence, but a federal judge ruled in favor of the government in 1981.
Oh!
Ceredica tests were continued until at least 1969. Now, and it's something I had written down there. Now, Ceredica is a gram-negative opportunistic pathogen, which gram-negative does not respond to antibiotics. Now, where it means that it's opportunistic, that means that it attacks those that have, like, immunocompromised, that they are debilitated. They've already got some kind of health issue. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, the people in the hospital, they contract this. If somebody is on a broad-spectrum antibiotic, it can make them susceptible to this. Somebody in the ICU. Now, again, this attacks respiratory tract and urinary tract, and it can get into the blood. You know, if somebody is on a respirator, it can certainly attack. If they've got a catheter, it can attack the urinary tract. And if it's a post-op thing, then it can get into their bloodstream.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's do this. Let's spray this on large quantities of people. Mm-hmm. In 1950, Dr. Joseph Stokes of the University of Pennsylvania deliberately infected 200 female prisoners with viral hepatitis. From the 1950s to 1971, mentally disabled children at the Willowbrook State School in Staten Island were intentionally infected with viral hepatitis. Well, it's viral, same thing. It was supposed to help discover a vaccine. From 1963 to 1966, Saul Krugman of New York University promised the parents of mentally disabled children that their children would be enrolled into Willowbrook in exchange for signing a consent form for procedures that he claimed were vaccinations. In reality, the procedures involved deliberately infecting children with viral hepatitis by feeding them an extract made from feces of patients infected with the disease.
That's disgusting.
In 1952, Chester M. Southam, a Sloan Kettering Institute researcher, injected live cancer cells known as HeLa cells into prisoners at the Ohio State Penitentiary and cancer patients. At the Sloan Kettering, 300 healthy females were injected with live cancer cells without being told. The doctors stated that they knew at the time that it might cause cancer. In 1953, Dr. Frank Oslin and several other colleagues were unknowingly dosed with LSD as part of a CIA experiment. Of course, everybody's heard of MK Ultra. If you haven't, look it up. I think we talked some, or I was going to talk some. Olson died 9 days later after falling to his death from a hotel window under suspicious circumstances.
Yeah, because he was fucking drugged and he was going to spread the truth, more than likely.
Yep. And December 17th, 1979, this one was the only one that was sort of possibly iffy. A claim by the Church of Scientology that the CIA conducted an open-air biological warfare experiment in 1955 near Tampa and elsewhere in Florida with whooping cough bacteria. It was alleged that the experiment tripled the whooping cough infections in Florida to over 1,000 cases and caused whooping cough deaths in the state to increase from 1 to 12 over the previous year. If they did do this, the reason that they could have chosen this site was because that people would be going, because it's questionable. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. During the 1950s, the United States conducted a series of field tests using entomological weapons, which means insects. And they did this. The insects were used to damage crops, cause disease, and of course to bite and or sting.
Let's kill people.
Yeah, well, think about it. We don't know that these killer bees and something is not some kind of a hybrid.
The killer hornets.
Operation Big Itch in 1954 was designed to test munitions loaded with uninfected fleas. So I guess it means that they weren't, they didn't have bubonic plague or something.
Yeah.
In May of 1955, over 300,000 uninfected mosquitoes were dropped over parts of the U.S. state of Georgia to determine if air-dropped mosquitoes could survive.
No shit.
The mosquito tests were known as Operation Big Buzz. The U.S. engaged in at least 2 other EW testing programs.
First of all, they do not buzz. They whine. They give off a whine rather than a buzz.
They do. But the other 2 bug testing programs, Operation Drop Kick and Operation Mayday. For a long time, people around here have discussed as far as some of the species that are not native to this area. We know that as far as the rattlesnakes, people have said a long time that it's a matter of them dropping them, that supposedly to control the rodents.
Then they could have put any other snake, any other non-lethal snake.
These cats and stuff, they help control the rodents.
But guess what? So do corn snakes.
Yeah.
And they are some of the most harmless snakes out there.
Yep. So there's a lot of things, and what do people do? They gaslight. In 1963, 22 elderly patients at the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital in Brooklyn, New York, were injected with live cancer cells by Chester M. Southam, who in 1952 had done the same to prisoners at the Ohio State Prison to discover the secret of how healthy bodies fight the invasion of malignant cells. The administration to the hospital attempted to cover the study up, but the New York Medical Licensing Board ultimately placed Southam on probation for 1 year.
No, they should have fucking took their licenses away.
It gets better. 2 years later, the American Cancer Society elected him as their vice president.
That is such fucking bullshit.
You can't make this.
As people who have lost family due to cancer, that is offensive.
Even if you haven't lost anybody, as a human being,
that is still
it's offensive.
Disgusting, vile, and offensive as hell, and those people are going to be rotting.
From 1963 to 1969, as part of Project Shipboard Hazard and Defense, The U.S. Army performed tests which involved spraying several U.S. ships with various biological and chemical warfare agents, while thousands of U.S. military personnel were aboard the ships. The personnel were not notified of the test and were not given any protective clothing. Chemicals tested by the U.S. military personnel included the nerve gases VX and sarin, toxic chemicals such as zinc cadmium sulfide and sulfur dioxide, and a variety of biological agents. And then for the last one for this section, because I don't think any of us can take much more in one fell swoop.
No.
In 1966, the U.S. Army released its Bacillus globigii, and it's got a different name now, but they released this into the tunnels of the New York City subway system as part of a field experiment called a study of the vulnerability of subway passengers in New York City to covert attack by biological agents. The Chicago subway system was also subject to similar experiment by the Army. Now, this bacillus is found in the soil and it does produce spores. And at first they thought that it was basically harmless, but it's not, because it can cause acute infections in those that may have weakened immune systems. And anything that's got a spore is a concern, because these things can get anywhere and everywhere. Those people could have carried those spores, of course, on their clothing or whatever to anyone around them. So,
anywhere and everywhere.
So, Mr. Nickel and Mr. Radford, this is the first of this slight series as far as mad scientists. I know they're just skeptics. But when you've got, and it's not just them, all these people screaming science, 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 no. Always do your own research. Look for the answers. They are out there. It's a matter of trying to find, trace the money trail. Always track the money trail.
More than likely, knowing them, knowing of them, they'd be like, They needle it, basically.
Well,
Like, what does this have to do with anything paranormal? Well,
when they're screaming science, science, science.
Exactly.
And as far as mad scientists and monsters and stuff like that here during spoopy season, I think it's perfectly acceptable.
This ain't even fun spoopy stuff.
No, it's not fun spoopy stuff. This is, as far as Mary Shelley when she wrote Frankenstein, even as far as Robert Louis Stevenson, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Just because you can do a thing does not mean that you should do a thing. And the character of Frankenstein, the monster, piteous, because he was very much the result of this horrific experiment.
And I think he knew that.
Sure he did. So it was not, and people blame him. It was not him. It was the one who created him, because what he had done was against God, against humanity. Now, anytime you've got a scientist that think that they know more than God, that's a recipe for disaster. Anytime that it's like, oh, well, God's design is wrong. So, anyhow, I hope everybody else is thoroughly pissed off. We will continue the pissing off for the next couple of days. And some of these I may not, those are just, and it was hard to pick and choose on some of them. I do want to go into some of the ways that the people that had mental illness were treated. Because that is, all of it's horrific. And that people need to remember, be careful who you believe, be discerning.
I mean, back then, literally, you and I would be put into those mental facilities because of our, mental things.
Oh,
like
well, depression is not, melancholia. I mean, it's like Edgar Allan Poe, he had melancholia. That was not that hardcore of something to where they would have put you in an asylum. But back then, they had family members. And we will discuss this when we get into that particular section. And that's with, I think it's the Baker Act, and it has been used against people with mental illness to prevent them from being hospitalized or institutionalized for more than 72 hours just by families, whatever. But if you've got somebody that's in a mental health crisis and after 72 hours, somebody says, hey, do you want to stay in the hospital? And they're like, no. And then what do? They put them back out on the street for real.
Yeah.
And family members have very little say on this. And, prayers are always appreciated because we still live in this. Yeah. So, but anyhow, and this is not fun, spoopy. This is just flat out scare the hell out of you.
Oh, it's more than scare the hell out of you. It's piss you the fuck off.
Right. But when you've got people saying trust us. Yeah, Ronald Reagan had a great quote about that. I'll probably put that at the end. Anyhow, if you've had experiences with paranormal, supernatural, encounters with UFOs, aliens, cryptids,
medical malpractice.
Well, it's something like that, and I pray that nobody's direct families have been affected by any of these horrific things. But as humans, as a species, we have all been affected by these things.
Yep.
So any of that stuff, if you want to rant about this, that's perfectly fine too.
Yep.
Send us an email, cupofcoffeewithscream@gmail.com.
You gotta write that down.
I did. And I actually tried to keep myself purposefully de-escalated, because if I wanted to act how I feel inside, I start stuttering and stammering, and that doesn't help anyone.
No, she lets me go off the rails.
That's okay. And part of this is I have known about this stuff before. And some of it is new to you, and I'm so sorry. But it is important to know what has been done, to try to prevent it from being done again. And I have a fear that we have failed on that. And God help us all. So, anyhow.
Well, that's a depressing note to end on this.
Well, it's not a depressing note. It is realism.
That's depressing.
No. It's a matter of an opportunity. We still have an opportunity to do something about this. And
Live
God is
life, and if you see something that's being done wrong, do something to help it.
Well, God is still
do
God.
something to actually make it right.
God is still God all by himself. And so that is a firm believer in prayer. I've seen it work. But you all have a beautiful, blessed day. And know that you are very loved and that you are very appreciated.
Yes.
Kids disturbed. It
I'm
is disturbing.
I'm
it
not
is
disturbed.
disturbing.
I'm pissed off.
Well, yeah, you should be. Everybody should be pissed off when you hear this stuff. So I promise I may do just one more day of this because it is so hardcore, and most people, listen to our channel and stuff to try to get away from some of the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, mad scientist, it's some scary shit.
Mm.
So bye.
Subscribe.
So that was part 1 of Mad Scientist.
Yes.
And these are longer cups, but it's worth the listen. Wash your dishes, mow your lawn.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Like, seriously, these ain't really meant to be watched. These are meant to be listened to.
Yeah, this is a podcast type thing.
Like, think if you went on Spotify and you just put on a playlist. It's like that. Do that.
You
while
can
you're
do your
washing
workout.
dishes. Yeah, you could do your workout. Do your yogas in the living room.
Well, I don't know.
While you're doing your shavasana.
This would
You're
probably
just
not
laying
be
there in
good.
your sweat.
This would probably not be good stuff to do the yogas too, because it's rather intense.
Do your cardio. Go on a jog. Eat in a lovely soup.
Yeah. So anyhow, and then we will have part 2 on the next cup, barring unforeseen.
Mm-hmm.
So you all have a beautiful, blessed day, and we will see you on the next cup.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.